All right, let's kick things off with a classic scenario. A supervisor's got a job number 303. He adds up the direct costs, materials, wages, expenses, gets 120 rupees. Simple enough. Then, to cover everything else, he just slaps on a flat 33.33%. Easy, right? But the real question is it correct? More importantly, in your CA Inter exam, is this a pass or a fail?
And you probably guessed it. It's a total trap. This little shortcut, which seems so logical on the surface, is one of the biggest reasons students lose easy marks in costing. ICII absolutely loves to test this. But don't you worry, by the time we're done here, you are going to see this trap coming from a mile away. So, welcome. In this explainer, we're going to do one thing and one thing only: master job costing. We're going to break down exactly why that supervisor's calculation was so wrong, and more importantly, I'm going to give you the playbook to turn any tricky job costing question into a full marks answer. Okay, first things first. To really understand why our supervisor messed up, we've got to go right back to square one. What even is job costing? Why do we use it? We need to build this foundation strong, so let's do it. Now, this definition might look a bit formal, but it holds the golden key. Look at those words: separate contracts, specific order. That's the whole idea right there. Every single job is its own unique universe. The second you start using a generic, one-size-fits-all percentage like our supervisor did, you've broken the #1 rule of job costing. And that core idea leads directly to these 3 principles. It's all about that specific job. You find the cost for that job, you control the costs for that job, and ultimately you figure out the profit for that single job. You should think of every job as its own little mini company with its own P&L statement. You just can't do that if you're averaging everything out. So, where do you see this in the real world? Well, it's for any business where every customer wants something different. Think about a printer doing wedding cards, a custom furniture maker, or even a massive shipbuilder. You wouldn't use the same cost formula for a tiny fishing boat and a giant cruise ship, would you? Of course not. Each job is unique, so each one needs its own calculation. Now, you might be thinking, tracking every single cost for every single job sounds like an absolute nightmare. And you're not wrong. It could be a mess. But that's why we have one central, all-powerful document to keep everything organized. Let's look at the most important tool in job costing. And here it is, the job cost sheet. Seriously, think of this thing as the financial passport for a single job. Every job gets one. Every cost related to that job, from the first screw to the final polish, gets recorded right here. It is your single source of truth for that job. Let's break down what's on here. It's not complicated, it's actually super logical. You start with the easy stuff, the direct costs you can trace, like materials and labor. Then you move on to the trickier part, assigning a fair share of all the other costs, the overheads. Only when every single cost is on this sheet can you get your true total cost and figure out your profit. Getting this right is everything. Right, so we've got this all-important job cost sheet. But right now, it's just a blank piece of paper. The big question is, where do all these numbers actually come from? How do we fill it up? Let's get into the practical, step-by-step process. Luckily, this whole process boils down to just 3 simple steps. Think of it as level 1, materials, level 2, labor, and then the boss level, overheads. That 3rd step, that's the one where most marks are lost, so we're going to pay special attention to it. Let's take them one by one. Step 1, materials. This one's the easy part, honestly. When a worker needs some wood for, say, job 123, they fill out a form that says, "I'm taking this wood for job 123. That form is called a material requisition note. Now, etch that name into your brain. Seriously, it's a classic MCQ question. Step 2, labor. And just like materials, this is also pretty straightforward. Workers track their time on something called a job time card. So if someone spends 3 hours working on job 123, they log it. That way, we can charge their wages directly to that job. See? Direct materials and direct labor are easy because you can directly trace them. But what about the costs you can't trace? Okay, deep breaths. This is step 3, the big one. This is where the marks are won or lost. Overheads. We're talking about things like rent, electricity, supervisor salaries. You can't just trace these to one job. So what do? Well, you collect all these costs, you divvy them up between departments, and then, and this is the absolute key, you apply them to jobs using a logical, realistic basis, like machine hours. This is the exact opposite of just slapping on a random percentage. And hey, don't just take my word for how tricky this is. Look at this quote. The ICAI's own material says choosing a basis for overheads is essentially an arbitrary method. That's a massive clue. It's telling you there's no single magic answer, which is precisely why a single blanket percentage is always wrong. A job that's machine-heavy needs to absorb more machine costs. Simple as that.
Okay, you've got the main framework. You're already way ahead of the game. Now, let's get into the details that really separate the top scores from everyone else. We're talking special cases and the journal entries that go with them.
Here is a classic exam curveball. Defective work. Pay close attention. If a few defects are normal and expected, the cost to fix them just gets added to the total cost of the job. But if something goes really wrong and the defects are abnormal, that extra cost is a loss. It gets charged to the costing P&L account, not the customer. ICAI loves to test if you know this difference. Now for the journal entries. The key here is to think of two separate highways. You've got the direct cost highway for things like wood and worker wages. Those go straight to the work in process account. Then you have the indirect cost highway for stuff like glue and supervisor salaries. Those take a detour through a holding area called the factory overhead control account. Do not mix up these two highways.
All right, we've been deep in the weeds of job costing. To really make sure this knowledge sticks, let's zoom out and look at the big picture by comparing it to its famous cousin, process costing. This comparison is a huge favorite for theory questions.
First, a quick look at the pros and cons. The biggest advantage, the whole reason we do this, is that you know the exact profit on every single job. That is incredibly powerful for making business decisions. The downside? Well, it's a ton of work. All that detailed tracking is expensive and time-consuming. It's a classic trade-off, detailed data versus administrative cost.
Okay, get your phones ready because this is a screenshot moment. This table is gold. If you remember just one thing, remember this. Job costing is for unique things, like a custom-built house. Process costing is for thousands of identical things, like cans of soda. Everything else flows from that single difference. In job costing, the hero is the job. In process costing, the hero is the process.
And that brings us right back to where we started. That supervisor, what was his big mistake? He fell for the oldest trick in the book, using one lazy, inaccurate percentage for everything. Now you know the right way, the full marks way, is to use separate, predetermined overhead rates for each department based on what actually drives the costs in that department.